Okay, for my next batch of testing audio, I'm going to read about the Tet Offensive because it was a sexy time in our nation's history. And yeah, here we go. The Tet Offensive, a complicated story simplified. The Tet Offensive has become enshrined as the turning point of the American war in Vietnam. Secondary textbooks, whether written for students at the most introductory level or designed for AP students, argue that the Tet Offensive was the turning point of the Vietnam War. Most American history textbooks use the actual phrase turning point in reference to the Tet Offensive and put the term in bold letters or use this phrase as a subchapter heading. The textbooks also argue that the war after Tet was characterized by little more than a tapering off of American involvement. The aftermath of Tet did indeed contribute to a shock to the American political system and new thinking about the war effort. In framing the Tet Offensive in this way, however, the texts ignore key changes in military and political prosecution of the war. Critically important facts and significant ideas related to the war. Such omissions distort the story of Vietnam in such a way as to make it difficult for students to understand the relationship of the Vietnam experience to the history of American involvement in the rest of the world, both before the Vietnam War and in events since. The role of the Tet Offensive in the narrative. The Tet Offensive was indeed significant in the story of Vietnam, an attempt to bring the war to a swift conclusion and to format a general uprising in the South. The Viet Cong, actually the NLF, National Liberation Front, known to the U.S. as the VC, and the North Vietnamese Army organized a series of surprise attacks throughout South Vietnam during the celebration of the Vietnamese New Year, Tet, in late January 1968. The extent and the fury of these attacks initially took the U.S. military and their South Vietnamese allies off guard, belying the argument being made to the American public that there was light at the end of the tunnel and that the war was soon to be won. Footage of the U.S. Embassy staff in retreat on the very embassy grounds and photographs of executions on the streets contributed to a sense that Tet signaled a final failure of the American strategy. Appropriately, all the textbooks discuss this sense of psychological defeat, as well as the significant political fallout, most especially Lyndon Johnson's decision not to run for re-election. Textbooks typically discuss the argument currently accepted by most historians that Tet represented a military defeat for the Viet Cong. Yet the textbooks also lead the reader to the conclusion that Tet led the U.S. to turn from one way of the war, the U.S. attempt to win, to another, the U.S. decision to leave. Hell yeah. And that was me reading about the Tet Offensive. So I hope you squallies enjoyed that. You have a great night.